The first letter arrived folded twice, written in careful, almost apologetic handwriting, and the cowboy nearly tossed it aside, with the rest of the mail that gathered dust on his table, because it carried no promise except warning, and warnings were things he had learned to ignore long ago. She wrote that she was plain, that her face held nothing remarkable, that her voice would not stop a room, that her hands were rough from work and her back slightly bent from years of labor, and she asked him not to imagine beauty where there was none, not to build hope on a picture that did not exist. He read the letter once, then again, slower the second time, not because the words were poetic, but because there was something honest in the way she tried to lower his expectations before they could grow dangerous. He had answered because loneliness has a way of making even guarded men reach for connection, and so the letters continued week after week, each one gently reminding him that she was ordinary, that her life was small, that if he came, he should come without dreams. The cowboy, who had crossed deserts and survived winters that killed weaker men, found himself thinking about her while riding fences, imagining not her face but her steadiness, the way her words never tried to impress, only to prepare. She told him about her days, about the small farm she ran alone since her father's passing, about dawns that came too early and nights that lasted too long, and every time she returned to the same refrain: "Do not expect beauty. Do not expect magic, expect only me as I am." He did not realize when it happened, but the absence of decoration became its own kind of allure, because in a world where everyone tried to shine, she insisted on being unpolished, and that honesty worked its way under his skin. By the time he decided to see her, it was not curiosity that drove him, but a quiet certainty that the letters had already changed him in ways he could not name. He rode for 2 days to reach her land, the landscape flattening into wide fields that seemed to breathe under the sky, and with every mile he reminded himself of her warnings, repeating them like rules he must obey. When he finally saw the farmhouse, it was smaller than he expected, weathered, standing stubbornly against the wind, and she was there by the fence, exactly as she had described, plain in the way sunsets are plain when you stop trying to photograph them. She did not smile when she saw him, not at first, and he realized she was bracing herself, waiting for disappointment to pass across his face like a shadow, waiting for the moment she had tried so hard to prevent. He removed his hat out of habit, then paused, because something inside him had already shifted, something the letters had prepared without his knowing. Her face was simple, yes, but there was a calm in her eyes that did not ask to be chosen, only acknowledged, and when she spoke his name it sounded practiced, as if she had said it many times alone. They stood there in silence longer than was comfortable, and he understood that this was the moment the letters had been pointing toward, the test of whether words could survive reality. She began to speak, apologizing again, explaining again, reminding him again that she had warned him, that if he turned back now she would understand. And it was then that he saw what the letters had never captured: the strength it took to offer someone the chance to leave before they had the power to hurt you. He told her nothing poetic, nothing dramatic, only that he was tired of chasing things that sparkled and burned out, and that he had come because her letters felt like rest. The admission surprised them both. As they walked toward the house, he noticed how she moved with purpose, how every step belonged exactly where it landed, and he realized that his idea of beauty had been shaped by noise and distance, not by presence. Inside, the house smelled of bread and earth, and everything had its place, not arranged for show but for living, and he felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for years. Over supper she spoke carefully, watching his reactions, measuring his pauses, and he watched her do the same. Two cautious people circling truth. She told him she had written the warnings because she had learned that hope can be cruel when it grows too fast, that men arrive with expectations and leave with excuses, and he listened, not to defend himself but to understand the shape of her fear. Night fell quietly without ceremony, and when he stepped outside he saw the stars spread wide and unafraid, and he thought about how often he had mistaken brightness for worth. Later, lying awake in the small guest room, he replayed her letters in his mind and realized they had not been warnings at all, but invitations to see differently. In the morning he helped with chores without being asked, and she watched him with cautious curiosity, as if unsure whether kindness could last past the novelty of arrival. They spoke little, but the silence between them did not strain, and he felt more present than he had in years. When he finally prepared to leave for the day, She stood by the gate again, uncertainty written across her face, and asked him softly whether he regretted coming. He thought of the man he had been before the letters, restless, always scanning the horizon for something better, and then of the man standing there, grounded by a truth that did not glitter but held. He answered honestly, telling her that seeing her once had already changed something he did not know, needed changing, and the relief that crossed her face was so raw it almost hurt to witness. As he rode away, he knew this was not an ending, but a beginning that would ask more of him than any trail ever had, because staying, truly staying, required a courage different from leaving. Behind him, the farmhouse stood steady, and ahead of him, the road felt different, not like an escape but a path leading back. And for the first time in his life, the cowboy understood that the letters had not tried to lower his expectations. They had tried to raise his vision, and seeing her once had made it impossible to look at the world the same way again. The cowboy returned 3 days later, though he told himself the ride was only to finish a job nearby, a lie so thin it fooled no one but his pride. And when the farmhouse came into view again, something inside him settled as if it had been waiting to exhale. She was in the yard, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back without care. And when she saw him, her first instinct was not joy but caution, because hope had taught her to walk softly. He greeted her simply, without grand explanation, and she nodded, accepting the moment as it was, not as she wished it to be, and that restraint deepened his respect more than enthusiasm ever could. Over the following days, he found reasons to stay, fences to mend, animals to tend, repairs that could not be rushed, and she allowed his presence without claiming it, as if afraid that naming it would make it fragile. In the evenings, they spoke more freely, and the letters that had once carried their voices gave way to conversations, shaped by pauses, glances, and shared understanding. She confessed how she had learned to describe herself as plain because the world was kinder when expectations were small, how disappointment hurt less when you warned it in advance, and he listened, with the patience of a man who finally understood that strength often hides behind modest words. He told her about the roads he had traveled, the towns that blurred together, the faces he barely remembered, and how motion had once felt like freedom until it began to feel like running. Slowly, without ceremony, trust took root, not dramatic or loud, but steady, like the land she worked every day. One afternoon, a storm rolled in unexpectedly, forcing them to shelter together in the barn, rain pounding the roof with a violence that made the world feel distant. And in that closeness, stripped of escape, he saw her clearly, not as plain or extraordinary, but as real, deeply and unshakably real. She laughed once, surprised by something small, and the sound caught him off guard, because it carried no performance, only release. And he realized then that beauty was not something she lacked. It was something she refused to trade or advertise. When the storm passed, nothing was spoken about the shift that had occurred, but both felt it, undeniable and permanent. That night he dreamed not of distant places but of staying, of mornings that repeated without dulling, of a life measured not by miles but by meaning. And when he woke, the idea no longer frightened him. Still, she hesitated, because she had seen men promise without knowing the weight of what they offered, and she reminded him again that she was ordinary, that her life would never be glamorous, that choosing her meant choosing quiet, repetition, and responsibility. This time, he answered differently, telling her that the world had taught him to chase spectacle, but she had taught him to recognize substance, and that what she called plain felt to him like truth without disguise. The admission shook her, not because it flattered her, but because it saw her, and being seen after a lifetime of hiding is its own kind of terror. Days turned into weeks, and the question of leaving lingered unspoken between them, heavy as an approaching season, until one morning he packed his saddle and stood by the gate where she had once braced herself for rejection. She did not ask him to stay, because love that begs feels too much like loss, and he did not ask permission, because commitment that hesitates often fails. He told her he was done measuring his life by how easily he could walk away, that he wanted to build something that did not require constant motion to feel alive. Tears filled her eyes, not dramatic, not overflowing, but restrained, the kind held back by people who have learned not to trust joy too quickly. And she asked him one last time if he would regret choosing a woman who had warned him so thoroughly. He answered by taking her hands, rough meeting rough, and said that her warnings had saved him, because they had stripped away illusion and left only choice, and choosing her felt like the first honest decision of his life. The years that followed were not stories told loudly, but they were told fully, marked by shared labor, quiet laughter, disagreements handled with respect, and love that deepened because it was never rushed. When people passed through and wondered what had made a wandering cowboy stop, they searched her face for an explanation and often missed it, because they were still looking for beauty that announced itself. But he knew, and she came to know too, that plain was never the absence of worth, only the absence of performance. And in that truth they found a life that did not need witnesses to be meaningful. In the end, the letters remained, tucked away in a drawer, not as reminders of warning, but as proof that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with promises, but with honesty brave enough to risk being overlooked.